In December of 2019, a 47-year-old Italian scholar named Dr. Mauro Biglino was found dead in his apartment in Rome. The official police report said suicide, overdose of sleeping pills, no signs of forced entry. Case closed within 48 hours. But here's what makes this story impossible to ignore. 3 days before his death, Biglino had sent an encrypted email to a colleague in Switzerland. In that email, he wrote that he had finally translated a complete section of the Nag Hammadi texts that had never been properly understood before. He said it contained explicit instructions, a protocol, something he called the sovereignty sequence. And he wrote one more thing that his colleague remembers word for word. They're not going to let this get out. If something happens to me, you'll know why. Nothing happened to him, according to the authorities. Just another academic who couldn't handle the pressure. Except Biglino wasn't depressed. He'd just signed a book contract. He was planning his daughter's wedding. And the manuscript he'd been working on, the one containing his translation of this so-called sovereignty sequence, it vanished. Not from his apartment. It was never there, police said. But his colleague in Switzerland had received portions of it, fragments. And what those fragments describe is so dangerous, so fundamentally threatening to existing power structures, that it makes you wonder if maybe the official story about Dr. Biglino's death isn't quite as simple as they want us to believe. The Nag Hammadi Library. If you've never heard of it, there's a reason for that. In December of 1945, an Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Samman was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. His shovel hit something hard. A large earthenware jar, sealed with a bowl-shaped lid and buried about 3 feet underground. Now, Muhammad Ali hesitated before breaking the jar open. Local superstition said that sealed jars could contain jinn, malevolent spirits, that would curse whoever released them. But he also thought the jar might contain gold. Greed won out over fear. He smashed the jar with his mattock. No gold spilled out. Instead, he found 13 leather-bound books, ancient codices written on papyrus in a language he couldn't read. Muhammad Ali almost burned them for kindling. He had no idea what they were, or that what he'd discovered would turn out to be one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. These weren't just any old books. They were Christian texts, Gnostic Christian texts, dating back to the 3rd and 4th centuries. Texts that had been deliberately buried, hidden away, because the content was considered too dangerous to exist in the world that was being created by the early Catholic Church. Here's what most people don't know. In the year 325, the Roman Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. The official purpose was to settle disputes about Christian doctrine and create a unified church. But what really happened at Nicaea was something far more calculated. A committee of bishops, under imperial pressure, decided which texts would be considered holy scripture and which would be condemned as heresy. Dozens of gospels, epistles, and sacred writings that had been used by Christian communities for centuries were suddenly declared false, dangerous, demonic, and the people who possessed these texts or taught from them were to be killed. So the Gnostic Christians, who saw themselves as the original followers of Jesus' actual teachings, went underground. They buried their sacred texts in sealed jars in the Egyptian desert, hoping that someday, when it was safe, someone would find them and the truth would be preserved. That's what Muhammad Ali found in 1945. 52 texts, gospels that didn't make it into the Bible, teachings that directly contradicted what had become official Christianity, and among those texts were some that described something absolutely shocking, something that connected directly to what we explored in the last video about the Sumerian tablets and the prison planet theory. The texts described beings called the archons. The word means rulers or authorities. According to the Gnostic Christians, the archons are the actual controllers of this world, not gods in the divine sense, not demons in the supernatural sense, but entities, beings with technology and knowledge far beyond ours, beings who created the material world as a prison, who created human bodies as containers to trap consciousness, who feed on human suffering, and have designed every system on this planet to generate maximum fear, pain, and spiritual confusion. Does this sound familiar? Because it's the exact same story the Sumerians told about the Anunnaki. Different names, same entities, same prison, same purpose. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Gnostic texts don't just describe the problem, they describe the solution. They explain that there was a rebel among the creators, a figure they call the serpent or Sophia, which means wisdom, This rebel gave humanity something that wasn't supposed to be given: knowledge, gnosis, the ability to see through the illusion, to recognize the prison, to remember what we were before we were trapped here, and most importantly, the Gnostic texts contain instructions for how to escape, not just metaphorically, literally, step-by-step procedures for what to do when you die, how to avoid the reincarnation trap, how to navigate past the archons, and how to return to the true source beyond this false reality. Now think about what this means. For over 1600 years, the Catholic Church has had possession of these texts, or knowledge of their content, and has actively worked to suppress them. The Church declared Gnosticism the ultimate heresy. Gnostic communities were massacred. Their books were burned. Their leaders were tortured and executed. The Cathars in France, who were Gnostic Christians, were completely exterminated in the 13th century. 20,000 people killed in a single day in the town of Béziers. Women, children, everyone. When asked how to tell the Cathars from the Catholics, the papal legate famously said, "Kill them all. God will recognize his own." Why such extreme violence? If the Gnostic texts were just harmless heresy, why not simply refute them with better arguments? Because the texts contained something that couldn't be argued against: evidence, procedures, knowledge that actually worked. The early church fathers weren't stupid. They knew that if this information spread, if people actually started practicing the techniques described in these texts, the entire control system would collapse. People would stop reincarnating, stop feeding the system, stop being the obedient, fearful slaves that every power structure depends on for its existence. So, when Muhammad Ali found those jars in the Egyptian desert, he didn't just discover old books, he discovered the instruction manual, the escape plan that had been hidden for 17 centuries. The texts made their way into academic circles. Scholars began translating them, and something strange started happening. Several of the early translators died under unusual circumstances. Others abandoned the work, citing personal reasons they wouldn't specify. The texts themselves ended up scattered across multiple institutions, making comprehensive study difficult. And certain sections, the ones describing the actual practices and techniques, remained mysteriously untranslated or were only discussed in very obscure academic papers that almost nobody reads. My name is Mr. H, and on this channel, we go where mainstream sources won't. We ask the questions that get people fired, marginalized, or worse. If you're someone who needs to know the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what we're diving into over the next 2 hours is going to be intense. This isn't light viewing. This is the information that got people killed, and we're going to lay it all out. Dr. Biglino was one of the few scholars who had access to some of the untranslated fragments. According to his colleague, the sovereignty sequence that Biglino had been working on described something that the Gnostics called the Divine Spark Protocol. It was a specific set of meditative and consciousness practices designed to reactivate something in human neurology that had been deliberately shut down, something located in the center of the brain, the pineal gland. The texts described it as humanity's sealed antenna, the connection point to what lies beyond this prison reality. And according to what Biglino had translated, the protocol wasn't just theoretical. It had been tested, used, proven to work by thousands of practitioners before the knowledge was suppressed. The fragments that survived describe the first steps of the protocol, practices involving specific breathing patterns, sound frequencies, and meditative visualizations designed to begin decalcifying the pineal gland and re-establishing its function. And here's what should terrify you. The Gnostic texts, written over 1700 years ago, describe the pineal gland's location, structure, and function with anatomical precision that wasn't supposedly known until the 20th century. They describe how it produces a substance, a molecule, that allows consciousness to perceive beyond the physical realm. We now know this molecule as DMT, and they describe how the controllers of this world have contaminated the water, the food, and the air with substances specifically designed to calcify this gland and shut down its function. Does that sound crazy? In 1997, a research team at the University of Surrey in England published a study showing that the pineal gland accumulates fluoride at higher concentrations than any other organ in the body. The study found that fluoride exposure leads to calcification of the pineal gland, which correlates with earlier onset of puberty and disrupted circadian rhythms. Earlier onset of puberty means earlier exposure to sexual hormones and social pressures before the brain is developed enough to process them wisely. Disrupted circadian rhythms mean poor sleep, which means impaired consciousness, poor decision-making, and increased susceptibility to manipulation. Fluoride is added to the water supply in most Western countries. The official reason is dental health. But fluoride's effectiveness for preventing cavities is minimal when applied topically, and essentially non-existent when ingested. So why is it really in the water? The Gnostic texts suggest an answer. Deliberately calcify the pineal gland. Shut down humanity's ability to perceive beyond the five-sense prison. Keep people locked in material consciousness, where they're easy to control, easy to manipulate, and unable to access the knowledge necessary for escape. This isn't ancient mythology. This is a description of current, ongoing, documentable policy. Dr. Biglino's translation allegedly went further. It described how the archons monitor human consciousness for signs of awakening, how they've embedded surveillance not just in our technology, but in the structure of reality itself, how certain frequencies, certain thoughts, certain states of awareness trigger responses from these entities, and most importantly, how to avoid that surveillance, how to awaken without triggering the alarm, how to practice the sovereignty sequence in a way that allows you to escape without being intercepted. That's what was in the manuscript that disappeared. That's what got Dr. Biglino killed. If he was killed, maybe he really did commit suicide. Maybe the pressure of understanding what he'd translated became too much. Or maybe he realized that releasing this information would make him a target and decided it wasn't worth it. We'll never know for sure. But we do know this. The information exists. Fragments of it have survived. And over the next 2 hours, we're going to piece together everything we can from the Nag Hammadi texts, from the Sumerian tablets, from mystery school traditions that managed to preserve the knowledge, and from modern research that accidentally confirms what the ancients knew all along. We're going to map out the escape plan, the one hidden in plain sight for anyone brave enough to look. Let's go back to those Sumerian tablets we talked about in the last video, the ones describing how the Anunnaki created humanity as a slave species to mine gold. But there's something crucial in those tablets that most people miss, something that changes the entire story from a simple tale of oppression to something far more complex and, frankly, far more hopeful. The tablets describe a split among the Anunnaki themselves, a civil war, essentially, between two half-brothers who had very different ideas about what should be done with humanity. Their names were Enlil and Enki. Enlil was the commander of Earth operations, the one in charge, the one who wanted humanity kept ignorant, obedient, and controlled. He's described in the tablets as harsh, authoritarian, quick to anger. When humans multiplied too much for his liking, he sent plagues. When they became too noisy, he sent droughts. And when they started showing signs of independence, he orchestrated the flood, fully intending to wipe out the entire human species and start over with a more controllable model. Enlil represents the ultimate control freak, the cosmic dictator who sees any spark of independence or consciousness in his creation as a threat that must be crushed. But Enki was different. Enki was the chief scientist, the one who had actually created humans by mixing Anunnaki DNA with the existing hominids on Earth. And something unexpected happened during that creation process. Enki became attached to his creation. The tablets describe him as humanity's protector, teacher, and secret benefactor. While Enlil wanted humans kept ignorant, Enki kept sneaking us knowledge, teaching us agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, writing, everything that would allow us to become more than just mindless workers. The tablets are very clear about this. Enki repeatedly broke the rules, defied direct orders from his superiors, and risked his own position to give humanity advantages we weren't supposed to have. The most famous example is the flood story. When Enlil decided to exterminate humanity, he ordered all the Anunnaki to keep silent. Humans weren't supposed to know the flood was coming. They were supposed to die, all of them, so the Earth could be repopulated with a better, more obedient model. But Enki couldn't let that happen. He found a loophole. He wasn't allowed to tell humans directly, but the tablets describe how he stood next to a reed wall and spoke to the wall about the coming flood. And on the other side of that wall, listening, was a man named Utnapishtim. Enki told the wall exactly how to build a boat, what dimensions it needed, how to seal it, what to bring. And Utnapishtim, just happening to overhear this conversation with a wall, built the ark and saved humanity. Does this story sound familiar? Because it should. The biblical flood story with Noah is directly taken from the older Sumerian tablets. But here's what got changed. In the original Sumerian version, there are two gods with opposing agendas, one trying to kill humanity, one trying to save it. But in the biblical version, there's only one God, and this creates a theological problem that's never been adequately explained. Why would a loving God create humanity, then decide to drown everyone except one family? The biblical story makes no sense unless you understand it's actually describing two different entities. Enlil, who wanted us dead, and Enki, who saved us. But the most important act of rebellion, the one that really matters for our discussion, happened much earlier, and it's hidden in the most famous story in the Bible, the Garden of Eden. Let's look at what the biblical text actually says, because when you read it carefully, without the theological interpretation imposed on it, something very strange emerges. God, which is actually the Elohim, a plural word meaning gods, creates Adam and Eve. He puts them in a garden. He tells them they can eat from any tree except one, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If they eat from that tree, God says, they will surely die. Then a serpent appears. The serpent tells Eve that they won't die if they eat the fruit. Instead, their eyes will be opened, and they'll become like the gods, knowing good and evil. Eve eats. Adam eats. Their eyes are opened. They realize they're naked. And here's the critical part that everyone overlooks. They don't die. The serpent was telling the truth. God was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. And then God says something absolutely crucial. He says, and this is Genesis chapter 3 verse 22, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life, and eat and live forever." So, God kicks them out of the garden and posts angels with flaming swords to guard the tree of life. Let's break down what's really being described here. The gods created humans to be workers, servants, but they specifically denied humans the knowledge that would make them independent. The knowledge of good and evil doesn't mean moral knowledge. It means the knowledge of duality, of opposites, of how reality is structured. It means consciousness, self-awareness, the ability to think for yourself rather than just follow orders. The Elohim didn't want humans to have this, and they definitely didn't want humans to have access to the tree of life, which represents extended lifespan or immortality, because if humans had both consciousness and long life, they wouldn't be controllable slaves anymore. They'd be equals. So who was the serpent? The biblical text calls him the most subtle or cunning of all creatures, but in the original Hebrew, the word used is nachash, which means serpent, but also means shining, one or one who has secret knowledge. And in the Sumerian tablets, there's only one Anunnaki who's consistently associated with serpents, who's described as the clever one, the wise one, the one who possessed secret knowledge, Enki. The tablets literally call him Enki, Lord of the watery deep, Master of secrets, Guardian of the serpent people. The Garden of Eden story isn't about the fall of man. It's about the liberation of man. It's about Enki, once again breaking the rules, giving humans the one thing they needed to eventually free themselves: consciousness, self-awareness, the ability to question authority. And the story has been inverted, twisted, turned into a tale of sin and disobedience, so that we would never understand what really happened. The serpent, humanity's liberator, became Satan, the ultimate evil. Knowledge became sin. Questioning authority became the original crime. And we've been programmed for thousands of years to believe that obedience is virtue and curiosity is dangerous. But the story survived in other forms. In Greek mythology, there's Prometheus, a titan who defied Zeus and gave humanity fire. Not just literal fire for warmth and cooking, but the fire of knowledge, technology, civilization. Zeus was furious. He had Prometheus chained to a rock where an eagle would eat his liver every day for eternity. Same story. A rebel from among the gods who risks everything to give humanity the tools we need to rise above our intended station. Prometheus is Enki. The serpent is Enki. Every culture has a version of this character, the divine rebel, the trickster god who breaks the rules to help humanity. And here's what makes this even more interesting. The Gnostic Christians, the ones whose texts were buried at Nag Hammadi, understood this completely. In their texts, they call the serpent in Eden the instructor or the illuminator. They say explicitly that the serpent was sent by Sophia, the divine wisdom, to free humanity from the control of the Demiurge and his archons. The Demiurge is their word for the false god who created the material world as a prison. Sound familiar? It's Enlil. The archons are his administrators, and Sophia, who sends the serpent, is the divine spark, the true source, working through agents like Enki to gradually awaken humanity. The Gnostic text called the Hypostasis of the Archons tells the Eden story from this perspective. It describes how the Archons created Adam as a slave, how they tried to keep him unconscious and obedient, how the Spirit of Wisdom sent the female instructor, appearing as a serpent, to teach Adam and Eve, and how the Archons became furious when humans began to wake up, saying, "Behold, Adam has become like one of us, knowing light from darkness. Now lest he be deceived like the first time, and take from the tree of life, and eat and live forever, and become a ruler." They're afraid that humans might become immortal and powerful enough to challenge their control. This is the real story that's been hidden behind corrupted religious narratives for millennia. There's a war happening, not a war in the physical sense with armies and weapons, but a war for human consciousness, for our sovereignty, for our freedom. On one side, you have the controllers, the Enlil faction, the Archons, the ones who want humanity kept ignorant, divided, fearful, and trapped in endless cycles of reincarnation where we never remember who we really are or what we're capable of. And on the other side, you have the rebels, the Enki faction, Sophia, beings who, for whatever reason, want humanity to wake up and reclaim our power. But here's the really important question. Why? Why would Enki or any of these beings help us? What's in it for them? The tablets and the Gnostic texts give us some clues. One possibility is that Enki genuinely developed affection for humanity, like a scientist becoming attached to his creation. He saw potential in us that Enlil didn't see or didn't care about. Another possibility is more strategic. Some researchers suggest that there's a larger cosmic conflict happening, and humanity represents a potential ally or asset if we could be awakened. By keeping us trapped and ignorant, the Enlil faction maintains control not just over Earth, but over a significant source of power, whether that's physical labor, emotional energy, or something else we don't fully understand. There's a third possibility that's even more interesting. What if the creation of humanity was an accident, or at least an unexpected result? The tablets describe the genetic engineering process as trial and error, many failures before success. What if in the process of mixing Anunnaki genes with terrestrial primates, something unexpected happened? What if the resulting hybrid, us, ended up with capabilities that weren't intended? A spark of something from higher realms that got trapped in these physical bodies during the creation process? The Gnostic texts call this the divine spark. They say every human contains a fragment of the true divine, trapped in matter, asleep, but not gone. And if that's true, then beings like Enki might be trying to help us wake up and escape because we're not supposed to be here. We're prisoners of war in a conflict we don't remember. And there are forces, even among our captors, who know this is wrong and are trying to set it right. The evidence for Enki's continued influence shows up throughout history. Every time humans made a sudden leap forward, every time knowledge appeared that seemed beyond what we should have been capable of at that stage of development, you can see hints of outside intervention. The sudden appearance of agriculture in multiple locations simultaneously, the explosion of megalithic building technology, the fact that the oldest structures are often the most sophisticated, suggesting that knowledge was given all at once and then gradually degraded rather than slowly accumulating. The Greek mystery schools that taught secret knowledge about the nature of reality, the Egyptian initiations that promised transformation of consciousness. All of these could be seen as Enki's rebellion continuing across centuries, knowledge being passed down, hidden, preserved, waiting for the moment when enough humans would be ready to use it. And that moment might be now. We're living in a time of unprecedented access to information. Ancient texts that were locked in monastery libraries or museum basements for centuries are now available online. People from different traditions can compare notes and see the patterns. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? What part of the world? Drop your location in the comments. I want to see how far this information is spreading. Are you in North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, South America? And what time is it where you are? Are you watching this in the middle of the night because you couldn't sleep, because something told you to search for answers? Or is it morning and you're starting your day by questioning everything you've been taught? Let me know. I read every comment, and seeing where you all are reminds me that this awakening is happening globally, not just in isolated pockets. The control system is still in place, stronger than ever in some ways, with technology enabling surveillance and manipulation at levels the ancient archons could only dream of. But the knowledge necessary to break free is also more accessible than it's ever been. It's as if ENKI'S long game is finally reaching a critical point. The question is whether enough of us will recognize the opportunity and use it. Because here's what the tablets and the Gnostic texts both make clear. The controllers can't actually stop us, not permanently. They can suppress, manipulate, distract, and delay. But if enough humans wake up, if enough of us remember what we really are and refuse to play our assigned roles, the entire system collapses. That's why the knowledge has been so viciously suppressed. That's why people who get too close to these truths end up marginalized, discredited, or dead. Not because the information is false, but because it's true. And the truth, as they say, will set you free. But first, it's going to make you very uncomfortable and very dangerous to the existing power structure. There's a structure in the center of your brain, about the size of a grain of rice, that's been called many things throughout history. The ancient Egyptians called it the Eye of Horus. The Hindus called it the Ajna Chakra, or third eye. Descartes, the famous philosopher, called it the seat of the soul. Modern science calls it the pineal gland. And if you look at what it actually does, you start to understand why every ancient civilization seemed obsessed with it. Because this tiny organ, sitting right in the geometric center of your brain, might be the physical key to everything we've been talking about. Here's something most people don't know. The pineal gland is the only unpaired organ in the brain. Everything else comes in twos, left and right hemispheres, symmetrical structures, but the pineal sits alone, right in the middle, in a tiny cave of cerebrospinal fluid, and it's loaded with more blood flow per cubic volume than any other organ in your body, except the kidneys. Why would evolution put so much energy and resources into such a tiny structure if it wasn't absolutely critical? For most of the 20th century, mainstream science considered the pineal gland basically useless, a vestigial organ. They knew it produced melatonin, which regulates sleep cycles, but that seemed like a pretty minor job for something positioned so centrally and receiving so much blood supply. Then, in the 1990s, researchers started discovering things that couldn't be easily explained. The pineal gland contains rod and cone cells, the same photoreceptor cells found in your eyes. Why would you have vision cells inside your brain, in complete darkness, sealed away from any light source, unless it's designed to see something that doesn't require external light? In 1990, Dr. Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico got FDA approval to study DMT, dimethyltryptamine, one of the most powerful psychedelic compounds known. People who take DMT consistently report remarkably similar experiences. They describe leaving their bodies, encountering intelligent entities, receiving information, visiting places that feel more real than physical reality. Strassman's research led him to a controversial hypothesis. He proposed that the pineal gland produces DMT naturally, particularly during birth, death, and deep meditation. He called DMT the spirit molecule because of its apparent connection to consciousness, leaving and entering the body. Now, Strassman couldn't prove this definitively because you can't exactly cut open living human brains to check, but in 2013, researchers finally found direct evidence. A study published in Biomedical Chromatography detected DMT in the pineal glands of live rats, not in trace amounts, in concentrations comparable to other neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. The implications are staggering. Your brain naturally produces one of the most powerful consciousness-altering substances known to science, produces it in an organ that ancient cultures said was the gateway to higher dimensions. Why? The ancient Egyptians seem to understand something about this. If you look at the Eye of Horus symbol, the mathematical proportions of its parts correspond exactly to the anatomical structures surrounding the pineal gland. The eyebrow represents the corpus callosum, the pupil represents the thalamus, the tear duct represents the hypothalamus, and the curved tail represents the brainstem. This symbol, carved into temples thousands of years ago, is effectively an anatomical diagram of the region housing the pineal gland. How did they know? They didn't have MRI machines or dissection technology that could preserve brain tissue clearly enough to see these structures, yet somehow they mapped it perfectly and considered it important enough to put everywhere. The Hindu tradition describes the Ajna Chakra, located precisely where the pineal gland sits, as the command center, the place where consciousness connects to the physical form. They developed elaborate practices, many involving breathwork and meditation, specifically designed to activate this center. Yogis who mastered these practices reportedly gained abilities that sound like science fiction: remote viewing, precognition, out-of-body experiences, telepathy. Now you can dismiss this as superstition, but these traditions didn't just talk about it. They developed systematic methods, written down in texts like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, that anyone could theoretically follow. Methods that thousands of practitioners over thousands of years claimed actually worked. So we have ancient wisdom from multiple unconnected cultures all pointing to the same thing. We have modern science discovering that this organ produces powerful consciousness-altering compounds. We have its unique position and structure suggesting something more than just a melatonin factory. And then we have one more piece of the puzzle that ties it all together: calcification. Starting around puberty, most people's pineal glands begin accumulating calcium phosphate crystals. By middle age, many pineal glands are so calcified they show up clearly on X-rays and CT scans, looking like small rocks inside the brain. For a long time, doctors assumed this was just normal aging. But then researchers started asking uncomfortable questions. Why does this specific organ calcify when most brain tissue doesn't? What causes it? And what are the consequences? In 1997, Jennifer Luke, the scientist at the University of Surrey in England, published research that should have made international headlines, but was largely buried in obscure academic journals. She demonstrated that fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland at extraordinarily high levels, higher than bones, higher than teeth. The pineal gland apparently attracts fluoride like a magnet, and fluoride exposure directly correlates with pineal calcification. Her research showed that calcified pineal glands produce less melatonin, leading to earlier puberty onset, disrupted sleep patterns, and a cascade of hormonal and neurological effects. But here's what Luke's research didn't explore, probably because it would have ended her career. If the pineal gland's real function involves DMT production and consciousness expansion, and if fluoride calcifies and essentially disables the pineal gland, then what we're looking at isn't just a dental health program gone wrong. We're looking at the systematic chemical lobotomization of human consciousness on a global scale. Fluoride was added to public water supplies, starting in the 1940s and 50s. The official story is that it prevents tooth decay. But if you actually look at the data, topical fluoride application has some modest benefits for teeth. Ingesting fluoride does almost nothing for dental health. Multiple studies across Europe, which largely doesn't fluoridate water, show no difference in dental health compared to fluoridated regions in the United States. So if it doesn't work for its stated purpose, why is it still being added to the water that hundreds of millions of people drink every day? During World War II, both Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia added fluoride to water supplies in concentration camps and occupied territories, not for dental health, for behavioral control. Fluoride in the doses present in drinking water doesn't kill you or even make you noticeably sick, but it does make you passive, compliant, less likely to question authority. There are declassified documents showing that I.G. Farben, the German chemical company that supplied the Nazis, specifically recommended fluoride for this purpose. After the war, many I.G. Farben scientists ended up working for American chemical companies that then lobbied heavily for water fluoridation programs, claiming it was for public health. Think about the timing. Ancient mystery schools taught pineal activation for thousands of years. Then organized religion suppressed these practices, declaring them demonic. Then, in the modern era, just as information was becoming more available and people might rediscover these techniques, fluoride gets added to the water supply. It's almost like someone really doesn't want humans accessing whatever capability the pineal gland provides. And fluoride isn't the only culprit. Calcium from processed foods accumulates in soft tissue when vitamin K2 is deficient, which it is in most modern diets. Glyphosate, the herbicide sprayed on almost all non-organic crops, crosses the blood-brain barrier and disrupts pineal function. Aluminum from cookware, deodorants, and chemtrails, if you believe those are real, also accumulates in the pineal. EMF radiation from cell phones, Wi-Fi, and the increasing electromagnetic soup we all live in appears to interfere with the pineal's natural electromagnetic sensitivity. It's like every aspect of modern life has been optimized to shut down this one specific organ. But it gets stranger. The pineal gland contains crystalline structures, not just calcium deposits from calcification, but actual geometric crystals similar to piezoelectric crystals used in technology. Piezoelectric crystals convert mechanical pressure into electrical signals, and vice versa. They're used in microphones, speakers, and sensors. The pineal's crystals appear to respond to electromagnetic fields. Some researchers suggest they might function as both receivers and transmitters of information carried on electromagnetic frequencies that our five senses can't detect. If that's true, if the pineal gland is essentially an organic radio antenna, then calcifying it would be like wrapping a radio in concrete. You could still technically use it, but you wouldn't receive any signals. You'd be cut off from whatever information those frequencies carry. And based on thousands of years of reports from mystics, yogis, shamans, and practitioners of consciousness exploration techniques, those frequencies apparently carry a lot. Information about the nature of reality beyond physical matter, communication with other forms of consciousness, access to memories from before birth, perception of the energetic structures underlying physical reality, all the things that would make a prisoner realize they're in a prison. This is why the pineal gland matters. It's not just interesting anatomy or ancient symbolism, it's the hardware, the biological interface between consciousness and the physical nervous system. Damage that interface, and consciousness remains locked in the five-sense prison, unable to perceive anything beyond the material world. Keep that interface functional and activated, and suddenly you can see the bars on the cage. You can potentially even reach through them. The ancient texts we talked about earlier, the Gnostic writings and the Sumerian tablets, they describe this. They say the archons, the controllers, specifically designed human bodies with limitations. Short lifespans so we can't accumulate too much knowledge. Restricted perceptions so we can't see the prison clearly. And if the pineal gland is the key to expanded perception, then keeping it calcified and dysfunctional would be priority one for any entity wanting to maintain control over human consciousness. You don't even need science fiction technology to do it. Just add some chemicals to the water and food supply. Make it seem like you're helping, like it's for dental health, or crop protection, or consumer convenience, and wait a generation for the effects to normalize. The question now becomes, can the damage be reversed? If your pineal gland is calcified, if you've been drinking fluoridated water and eating processed food your whole life, is it too late? Or is there a way to clear out the calcification, reactivate the gland, and restore the function that ancient practitioners took for granted? Because if the escape plan hidden in those ancient texts involves activating consciousness beyond the five-sense prison, then step one is getting the hardware working again. And that's exactly what we need to talk about next. In 1818, an Italian explorer named Giovanni Battista Caviglia spent weeks digging through the debris inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. He was searching for the pharaoh's treasure, the golden sarcophagus, the riches that every pyramid was supposed to contain. What he found instead was nothing. The granite box in the king's chamber was empty. No mummy, no treasure, no inscriptions. Just a precisely carved granite container sitting in a room made of massive blocks, some weighing 70 tons, fitted together so perfectly you can't slide a credit card between them. Caviglia wasn't the first person to find nothing in a pyramid, and he wouldn't be the last. Because here's something that mainstream Egyptology doesn't like to advertise. We've never, not once, found a pharaoh's mummy inside a pyramid. Not one. Every mummy ever discovered was in the Valley of the Kings, in underground tombs carved into cliff sides. Those tombs have walls covered in hieroglyphs, paintings showing the pharaoh's life and journey to the afterlife, warnings to grave robbers, prayers to the gods. They're clearly burial sites. But the pyramids? Almost no hieroglyphs, no paintings, no inscriptions identifying who they were supposedly built for. The only reason we call the three pyramids at Giza the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure is because of graffiti. Literally, quarry marks and workers' graffiti found in small chambers that may have been added centuries after construction. The actual pyramid builders left no record of who they built these structures for or why. So if they're not tombs, what are they? The standard explanation is that they were tombs, but they were robbed in antiquity. Every single one. Completely cleaned out. But that doesn't explain the architectural features that make no sense for a burial chamber. Take the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid. It's an ascending corridor, 28 feet high with a corbelled ceiling, each layer of stone precisely stepped inward. Why would you need such a massive, elaborately constructed hallway just to carry a body to a burial chamber? And why are there 27 pairs of slots carved into the ramps on either side of the Grand Gallery? Slots that clearly held something that's been removed. Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer who spent decades studying the Great Pyramid, proposed something that makes Egyptologists very uncomfortable. He suggested the pyramid was a machine. Specifically, a power plant that converted Earth's seismic energy into electrical power using the piezoelectric properties of the granite and quartz crystals embedded throughout the structure. Dunn's analysis shows that the so-called King's Chamber sits directly above a huge cavity in the bedrock that would have been filled with water. The chamber itself is made of granite from Aswan, 500 miles away, even though limestone was available locally. Why bring granite such a massive distance unless its specific properties were essential? Granite contains high concentrations of quartz crystal. Quartz is piezoelectric, meaning it generates electrical charge when subjected to mechanical pressure. If water in the cavity below was being vibrated by seismic activity, those vibrations would travel through the pyramid's stone structure, causing the quartz crystals in the granite to generate electrical current. The Grand Gallery, Dunn suggests, was a resonant cavity that amplified specific frequencies. Those slots on the sides held Helmholtz resonators, devices that vibrate at precise frequencies. The whole structure was designed to capture, amplify, and focus energy. But energy for what purpose? This is where it connects to everything else we've been discussing. Nikola Tesla, perhaps the most brilliant and suppressed inventor in modern history, spent years trying to develop wireless power transmission. He believed, and actually demonstrated on a small scale, that you could transmit electrical energy through the Earth itself using resonant frequencies. He built Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island specifically for this purpose. The tower was designed to tap into the Earth's natural electrical field and broadcast power wirelessly to receivers anywhere on the planet. Free energy, no power lines, no control over distribution, no way to make people pay for it. The project was shut down when JP Morgan realized he couldn't put a meter on it and withdrew funding. Tesla died in poverty, and most of his research notes disappeared after his death, confiscated by the FBI. Now look at the global distribution of pyramids. They're not just in Egypt. There are pyramids in Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, Bosnia, China, Indonesia, and underwater structures off the coasts of Cuba and Japan that appear to be pyramidal. Someone built these structures all over the planet, often using similar techniques and oriented to specific celestial alignments. If you map their locations, something interesting emerges. They sit on energy nodes, points where the Earth's electromagnetic field is particularly strong. It's as if someone was building a global network of power generators or receivers, positioned precisely to tap into the planet's natural energy grid. The Egyptian pyramids specifically align with Orion's belt, a configuration that, according to computer simulations, hasn't matched the pyramid's layout since approximately 10,500 BC. The Sphinx shows water erosion that geologists say could only have been caused by substantial rainfall, the kind that region hasn't experienced since before 7000 BC, which means these structures are far older than the official timeline suggests. They predate dynastic Egypt, predate the pharaohs we credit with building them. The ancient Egyptians may have inherited these structures from whoever actually built them, tried to figure out what they were for, failed, and eventually just started using them for tombs and temples because the buildings were already there. But some Egyptians clearly knew more. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in Egypt, describe the pharaoh's journey to the stars after death. They talk about transformation, about the body becoming something else, about ascending to join the gods in Orion and Sirius. Not metaphorically, the texts give specific instructions, describe specific processes. One passage says, the king appears as a star, a companion of Orion. Another describes chambers within chambers, hidden doorways, passageways that lead to places not of this earth. It reads less like religious poetry and more like operational instructions for technology nobody alive remembered how to use. In 1993, a German robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot up one of the narrow shafts leading from the Queen's chamber. These shafts are 8 inches square, too small for a human, and they don't lead outside. They just go into the pyramid's mass and stop, or so everyone thought. Gantenbrink's robot discovered that the shaft ends at a limestone door with copper handles. There's something behind that door. Ground-penetrating radar suggests a chamber. But Egyptian authorities stopped the exploration. They wouldn't let Gantenbrink continue. They wouldn't let anyone else check what was behind the door. When a second robot finally drilled a tiny hole through the door in 2002, it found another chamber with another door. Behind that, who knows? The exploration was shut down again. Why? What are they protecting? There's a pattern here. Every time someone with modern scientific equipment approaches these ancient structures with genuine curiosity and no agenda to confirm the official story, They find things that don't fit the narrative, and then the exploration gets stopped. Access gets denied. The researcher gets marginalized. The Sphinx Hall of Records, which Edgar Cayce and multiple ancient sources say exists beneath the Sphinx's pores, has been repeatedly detected by ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys. There's definitely something down there, a chamber network carved into the bedrock, but excavation is forbidden. The Egyptian government says it would damage the monument, even though they allow far more invasive tourist activity that's actually causing damage. In the 1930s, Cayce described these Hall of Records in remarkable detail. He said they contained the complete history of humanity, going back hundreds of thousands of years, technology from before the flood, information about who built the pyramids and why, and most importantly, knowledge about what he called the Law of One, the fundamental principles of consciousness and reality that would allow humanity to transcend physical limitations. Cayce said these records would be discovered before the end of the 20th century and would trigger a global awakening. Well, we detected the chambers, but we're not being allowed to access them. Someone decided humanity isn't ready for what's down there. Meanwhile, mainstream archaeology insists the pyramids were built with copper chisels and wooden ramps by workers dragging multi-ton stones up sand inclines. They can't explain how workers achieve tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch. They can't explain how supposedly primitive people quarried, transported, and precisely placed stones weighing 70 tons each, many of them granite brought from 500 miles away. They can't explain the tool marks on granite and basalt that show characteristics of high-speed machining. They can't explain the mathematical constants encoded in the pyramid's dimensions, the speed of light in meters per second, the mean radius of the Earth's orbit around the Sun, the precise value of pi extended to multiple decimal places, all built into a structure supposedly constructed by people who hadn't invented the wheel yet, unless they had help, unless they had technology, or unless they were simply following instructions and measurements given to them by someone else, building according to plans they didn't fully understand, using techniques that were taught to them rather than developed by them. The Egyptians themselves said this. Their own records talk about the gods, the Neteru, who came from the stars and established civilization. They talk about Thoth, the god of wisdom, who gave them writing, mathematics, and sacred geometry. They say explicitly that their knowledge came from before, from a golden age that was destroyed in a cataclysm. And if the pyramids were part of a global energy network, if they were designed to generate and transmit power using resonant frequencies, then here's the really disturbing question. Are they still functional? Have they ever been reactivated? In 2007, a strange humming sound was reported around the Giza Plateau. It lasted several weeks. Local residents described it as coming from underground, a deep vibration they could feel in their bones. Equipment brought in to measure it detected extremely low-frequency waves, the kind that can travel through the Earth for thousands of miles. The Egyptian government said it was construction equipment, but the sound pattern was consistent, rhythmic, and definitely not random machinery noise. And then it stopped as suddenly as it started. No explanation was ever given. If these structures are machines, if they're connected to consciousness and energetic frequencies the way ancient texts suggest, then maybe someone doesn't want them turned on. Maybe the calcified pineal glands we talked about in the last section aren't just about keeping individuals unconscious. Maybe they're about keeping humanity collectively unable to perceive or interact with a global system of energetic technology that's been sitting dormant for thousands of years. Technology that, if reactivated and understood, could provide free energy, could enable communication beyond physical limitations, could potentially even be used to break down the frequency barriers that keep consciousness trapped in the material prison. The pyramids aren't tombs. They're tools. Weapons, maybe, in the war for human consciousness. And we've been told they're graveyards, so we wouldn't think to ask how to turn them back on. Every year in ancient Greece, thousands of people gathered at Eleusis, a small town near Athens, for a secret ceremony that was never supposed to be described. The Eleusinian mysteries ran continuously for almost 2,000 years, from around 1500 BC until the Christian emperor Theodosius forcibly shut them down in 393 AD. Participants came from all social classes, including some of the most brilliant minds in history. Plato attended, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, Cicero. After experiencing the rites, they would say things like, "Death is no longer fearful, and I have seen the truth beyond the veil." But not one of them, across 2 millennia, ever wrote down what actually happened during the ceremony. Breaking the oath of silence meant execution. So, Whatever these mysteries revealed, whatever transformation occurred during that night of initiation, it was considered important enough to die protecting. Until recently, historians assumed the mysteries were just elaborate theatre, psychological tricks using dim lighting and dramatic staging to create religious experiences. Then, in 2006, archaeologists analyzing residue from ceremonial vessels found something unexpected: ergot alkaloids, the same compounds found in LSD. The mysteries weren't theatre, they were pharmacological. Initiates were given a carefully prepared psychoactive brew called the kykeon, which modern analysis suggests was essentially ancient ayahuasca, combining ergot-derived compounds with other plants to create a controlled, profound alteration of consciousness. For one night, the veil between ordinary reality and whatever lies beyond it was chemically lifted, and what initiates experienced was so transformative, so undeniably real, that it changed their entire relationship with existence. This wasn't unique to Greece. The ancient Egyptian temple complexes at Luxor, Karnak, and Dendera had inner chambers where priests performed what they called the mysteries of Osiris. Candidates underwent elaborate preparations, fasting, ritual bathing, learning sacred chants and movements. Then they were led into darkness, into underground chambers, where something happened that was never publicly recorded. Inscriptions on temple walls show the candidate lying on a stone table, surrounded by priests wearing masks of animal-headed gods. Above them, symbols: the Ankh, representing life, or the key to life; the Dayjade pillar, representing stability, or the human spine with energy centers activated; the Was scepter, representing power or authority. These weren't decorative, they were instructions, a symbolic language teaching something that couldn't be spoken directly. Egyptian initiates who completed the mysteries were said to have died and been reborn. They were given new names, granted access to restricted areas of temples, and recognized as having achieved something called knowing one's ka, which translates roughly as understanding your true self beyond the physical body. The similarity to modern near-death experiences is striking. People who've had NDEs consistently report similar elements: leaving the body, moving through darkness toward light, encountering beings, or a presence that radiates unconditional love, receiving information or understanding that completely transforms their fear of death. The Egyptian mysteries appear to have been deliberately inducing this experience while the person was still alive, using techniques that combined sensory deprivation, controlled breathing, specific sound frequencies, and almost certainly psychoactive compounds derived from blue lotus flowers and other plants. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras spent 22 years studying in Egyptian temples before returning to establish his own school in Italy. The Pythagorean mysteries focused heavily on mathematics and music, but not the way we understand those subjects today. For Pythagoras, numbers weren't just counting tools. They were the fundamental language of reality, the geometric patterns underlying physical forms, the ratios that determine harmonic frequencies. He taught that reality is essentially vibration, different frequencies of the same underlying energy, and that by understanding these frequencies and learning to align with specific harmonic patterns, consciousness could transcend physical limitations. This sounds mystical until you realize modern quantum physics describes reality almost identically. Everything is wave functions, frequencies, probabilities collapsing into particles when observed. Pythagoras was teaching quantum mechanics 2,500 years early. His school required absolute vegetarianism, periods of silence lasting years, daily purification practices, and the memorization of complex mathematical and musical relationships. Students who completed the initiations were taught what Pythagoras called the music of the spheres, the idea that celestial bodies produce sounds, frequencies that most humans can't perceive, but that influence consciousness and physical reality. This wasn't poetry. Pythagorean texts give specific frequencies, specific ratios, specific tones that supposedly corresponded to planets, to states of consciousness, to the structure of the soul itself. Modern researchers testing these frequencies have found that some of them produce measurable effects on brain activity, particularly in the range that influences pineal gland function. Then there were the Orphic mysteries, another Greek tradition that taught something radical for its time: reincarnation, but not the sanitized version we hear about in New Age circles. The Orphics taught that reincarnation was a punishment, a trap, a cycle of suffering that souls needed to escape. They had a detailed cosmology describing how, at death, souls are presented with choices: shown images designed to emotionally manipulate them into accepting rebirth. And if they fall for it, their memories are wiped and they're sent back into another body to suffer again. The only way out, according to Orphic teaching, was gnosis, direct knowledge of your true nature, recognition that you're not the body, not the personality, not even the soul in the way most people understand it. You're a fragment of something eternal that got trapped in matter and forgot itself. The Orphics created detailed instructions, literally written on gold tablets and buried with initiates, describing what to do after death. These tablets have been found in graves across Greece and southern Italy. They contain passwords, specific phrases to speak to the entities you'll encounter, descriptions of pools of water you should avoid drinking from because they cause forgetfulness, and directions to find the spring of memory that allows you to maintain consciousness through the death transition. This is the same information in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, written thousands of miles away, and similar instructions appear in Egyptian funerary texts. Different cultures, separated by distance and time, all teaching the same escape protocol. The pattern continues everywhere you look. The Mithraic mysteries, practiced by Roman soldiers, involved a 7-stage initiation process that supposedly corresponded to passing through the 7 planetary spheres that trap souls in the material realm. Initiates met in underground temples called Mithraeums, always constructed with specific architectural features, including a representation of the cosmos, a relief showing Mithras slaying a bull, which scholars now think represents the precession of equinoxes and the end of an astrological age. The highest level initiates were called fathers, and were said to have achieved liberation from fate, meaning they'd escaped the deterministic forces that control ordinary humans. In medieval Europe, the Cathars, who we mentioned earlier, practiced a form of Christianity so different from Catholicism that the Church declared them heretics and exterminated them. The Cathars taught that the material world was created by an evil demiurge, that the God of the Old Testament was actually this false creator, and that Jesus came to teach the way out of physical reality, not to establish a new religion. They practiced something called the consolamentum, a ritual that supposedly severed the soul's attachment to physical incarnation. After receiving it, many Cathars would fast until death, choosing to exit the body rather than risk falling back into unconscious material existence. The Catholic Church didn't just kill Cathars, they burned every text, destroyed every record, tried to erase the knowledge completely, which suggests the knowledge was real and dangerous. The common thread running through all these traditions is direct experience over belief. You didn't join a mystery school to be told what to think. You underwent processes designed to show you something, to trigger an experience that would change your consciousness permanently. The symbols, the rituals, the elaborate preparations weren't the point. They were technology, methods for inducing specific states that allow perception beyond ordinary sensory reality. And what people consistently perceived, across cultures and centuries, was the same thing. That physical reality is a kind of prison or illusion. That consciousness is not produced by the brain but temporarily limited by it. That death is a transition point where you have choices if you know what you're doing, and that there's a way out if you prepare properly. This is why the mystery schools were systematically destroyed. First by the Romans, who saw them as political threats because people who've transcended fear of death are very hard to control. Then by the Christian Church, which needed people to believe salvation came only through institutional religion, not through direct experience. You couldn't have people learning they could liberate themselves through ancient practices. That would eliminate the Church's entire power base. So the mystery schools were shut down, their temples were converted or demolished, their texts were burned, and their practitioners were killed or forced underground. But the knowledge didn't completely disappear. It went into hiding, encoded in symbols, preserved in myths and fairy tales that seemed like harmless stories, but actually contained instructions. The hero's journey that appears in every culture isn't random. It's a map. Leaving home represents incarnation. The trials and challenges represent the material world's obstacles. Meeting the goddess or finding the treasure represents gnosis, the moment of awakening. Returning transformed represents escaping the cycle. These patterns got embedded in stories because stories survive when institutions fall. Alchemy, which everyone thinks was medieval chemistry and the quest to turn lead into gold, was actually a mystery school practice hidden in chemical metaphors. The lead wasn't metal. It was the base consciousness of ordinary humans, trapped in matter, identified with the body. The gold was enlightened consciousness, purified, free, divine. The entire process described in alchemical texts The nigredo, the albedo, the rubedo, the stages of blackening, whitening, and reddening. These were describing the initiatory death and rebirth process, killing the false self, purifying consciousness, emerging transformed. It was the Egyptian mysteries preserved in symbolic language that church authorities wouldn't recognize as spiritual teaching because it looked like recipes for making potions. The same happened with tarot cards, which appeared in medieval Europe supposedly as a game but contained the entire initiatory journey encoded in images. The fool beginning the journey, the magician learning to manipulate reality, the high priestess representing hidden knowledge, the tower representing the destruction of false structures, death representing transformation, not ending. The cards are a portable mystery school, instructions for consciousness evolution, disguised as fortune-telling, so they wouldn't be burned. Even Freemasonry, despite becoming corrupted over time, preserved fragments of Egyptian and Pythagorean teaching in its symbols and rituals, keeping alive the idea that there's hidden knowledge requiring preparation to receive. The mystery schools understood something crucial. Information alone doesn't liberate. Reading about enlightenment doesn't enlighten you any more than reading about swimming teaches you to swim. You need practice, techniques, direct experience. That's why they developed elaborate systems combining meditation, breathwork, sound, movement, fasting, and yes, carefully used psychoactive plants. They were creating conditions under which ordinary consciousness could temporarily shut down, and something else, something they called the higher self or divine spark, could emerge and be recognized. Modern science is accidentally rediscovering this. Research into meditation shows measurable changes in brain activity and structure. Studies of psychedelics demonstrate consistent mystical experiences that reduce fear of death and increase sense of connection to something larger. Breathwork techniques like holotropic breathing can induce non-ordinary states without any substances. We're finding that the ancient practices actually work, that they're based on real understanding of consciousness and neurology, just described in different language, which means the escape protocols hidden in mystery school teaching aren't superstition. They're operational manuals. And the symbols they left behind aren't decoration. They're the user interface for liberation technology that's been sitting in plain sight for thousands of years, waiting for someone to remember how to read the instructions. In 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody published a book called Life After Life that documented something medical science had been quietly noticing but not discussing. People who were clinically dead, heart stopped, no brain activity, and then revived, were coming back with remarkably consistent stories. They described leaving their bodies, floating above the operating table, moving through a tunnel toward a brilliant light, encountering deceased relatives or beings of light who radiated unconditional love. Many said they were given a choice to return or continue forward. Those who returned spoke about it as the most profound, beautiful experience of their lives. The fear of death disappeared completely. They knew, with absolute certainty, that consciousness continues. Near-death experiences became respectable research territory. Thousands of cases documented. The consistency across cultures, ages, and religious backgrounds seemed to confirm that something real happens at the threshold of death. Something that challenges materialist assumptions about consciousness ending when the brain stops. But here's what hardly anyone talks about. A smaller subset of near-death experiences, maybe 5 to 10%, describe something very different. Instead of love and light, they encounter something that feels wrong, manipulative, false. A man named Wayne Bush has spent years collecting these accounts. People who went toward the light and at the last moment felt a shock of recognition, and knowing that this wasn't what it appeared to be. They describe the light feeling artificial, generated rather than divine. The beings who greet them, radiating an emotional frequency designed to lower defenses. The entire experience, structured like a sales pitch, complete with emotional manipulation, time pressure, and incomplete information. Several reported that when they resisted, when they refused to go toward the light or questioned what was happening, the loving demeanor of the beings changed. They became insistent, even threatening. One account describes a woman who during her NDE was shown images of her children suffering without her husband devastated, her family falling apart. The message was clear. You have to go back. They need you. It's your duty. But she noticed something strange. The emotions these images triggered felt externally imposed, pumped into her rather than arising naturally. When she focused on that recognition, the entire scene flickered like a hologram losing signal. The beings showing her these images revealed themselves as something else, something that wasn't human and had never been human. And she realized with horror that if she'd accepted their story, if she'd agreed to return, she would have been consenting to something she didn't fully understand. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, written centuries before modern near-death research, describes this exact scenario. It warns that after death, you'll encounter peaceful and wrathful deities. But it explicitly states these are not real beings. They're projections, manifestations designed by the bardo, the intermediate state, to test your awareness and trap you if you're unconscious. The text instructs the dying person to recognize all appearances as illusory, to neither grasp at pleasant visions nor flee from terrifying ones, to maintain awareness that you are not separate from whatever you perceive. If you can hold that recognition, you don't reincarnate. You achieve liberation. But if you fall for the projections, if you react with desire or fear, you get drawn back into the wheel. The Gnostic texts we discussed earlier say essentially the same thing but with more detail about who's running the projection system. They describe the archons as entities who've constructed this entire reality as a soul farm. Physical incarnation generates emotional energy, particularly suffering, which these beings feed on. But they can't force souls to incarnate. Consciousness has sovereignty, so they've developed elaborate tricks. False lights, fake relatives, appeals to duty, karma, unfinished business, memory wipes disguised as healing, contracts that you're manipulated into agreeing to while in a confused, vulnerable state between lives. The Gnostic solution is the same as the Tibetan one. Don't engage. Don't consent. Maintain awareness that you're not obligated to return, regardless of what you're told. Now, this sounds paranoid until you start looking at the actual mechanics of how consciousness gets inserted into bodies. Past life regression therapists, particularly those using deep hypnosis techniques, have documented something disturbing. Clients often describe being in a kind of waiting area between lives. They're shown potential future lives, given guidance by beings they perceive as teachers or counselors. They're told they have lessons to learn, karma to work off, soul contracts to fulfill, and they choose to reincarnate based on this information. But here's the thing. These memories describe the choice happening while they're still somewhat confused, still processing the trauma of the previous death, not fully remembering their true nature. It's like signing a legal contract while you're drunk. The consent might be technically there, but it's not informed consent. Dr. Michael Newton's books on life between lives describe this counseling process in detail based on thousands of regression sessions. Souls meet with guide figures who show them charts, options, tell them what they need to work on. Most of Newton's clients describe this as benevolent, helpful, but a few described feeling pressured, railroaded into choices they weren't sure about, given incomplete information about what incarnation would actually involve. And none of them, while between lives, seemed to have access to their full consciousness or memory. They remembered fragments of previous lives, but not the totality of their existence, as if something was filtering their awareness, keeping them from seeing the bigger picture. There's a researcher named Cameron Day who's proposed something radical. What if the entire New Age spiritual framework, with its emphasis on karma, soul contracts, and learning lessons through suffering, is itself part of the trap? These concepts didn't exist in the oldest spiritual traditions. The idea that you need to reincarnate repeatedly to learn and grow is a relatively recent addition to human spiritual thought. Ancient mystery schools taught the opposite, that repeated incarnation is the problem, not the solution, that the goal is to escape the cycle, not perfect yourself within it. Karma, as we understand it today, the idea that you're obligated to return to balance cosmic accounts, is a control mechanism, a debt that can never be fully paid because the system keeps inventing new reasons you need to come back. Day suggests that when you die, if you're confronted with beings telling you about karma and soul contracts, the correct response is to refuse the framework entirely. You don't owe anything. You're not obligated to learn lessons through suffering. Any contract you signed was signed under duress or manipulation and is therefore void. Simply stating your sovereignty, claiming your right to exist as consciousness without incarnating, apparently has power in these realms because it invokes a level of cosmic law that even the archons have to respect, but only if you know to do it, only if you're prepared. The challenge is that death typically involves trauma. The separation from the body is disorienting. You're flooded with emotions from the life just ended. If you died violently or unexpectedly, you're confused, possibly in shock. This is when you're most vulnerable to manipulation. which is exactly why mystery schools spent so much effort preparing initiates for this moment. The Egyptian Book of Coming Forth by Day, mistakenly called the Book of the Dead, is literally a guidebook for maintaining consciousness through death and the afterlife journey. It describes specific passwords, names to invoke, declarations to make, not prayers, commands, statements of identity and authority that allow the deceased to navigate past the guardians and judges of the underworld without getting trapped. Similar instructions appear in the golden tablets buried with Orphic initiates. I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. This isn't poetry, it's a declaration of cosmic citizenship, a statement that you recognize your true origin and aren't subject to the authorities of the material realm. The tablets then give specific directions. When you see two springs, one of memory and one of forgetfulness, don't drink from forgetfulness, no matter how thirsty you are. That spring causes amnesia, wipes your memory, and prepares you for reincarnation. Drink instead from memory, guarded by sentinel beings. Tell them you're a child of heaven. They'll let you drink, and you'll maintain full consciousness through the transition. Modern accounts from people who've had multiple near-death experiences and maintained awareness throughout describe something similar. There are zones or layers after death. The initial tunnel and light appear to be just the first checkpoint. If you go toward the light automatically, without question, you end up in what one experiencer called the processing center. You meet your guides, review your life, discuss what you need to work on next, and get sent back. But if you pause, if you question the process, if you firmly intend to go somewhere else, the environment responds. The tunnel can be bypassed. Alternative destinations become visible. Some describe breaking through to a different level entirely, a space that feels more real, more home, and from that vantage point, the light and the processing center look like exactly what they are: a sorting system, a recycling facility for consciousness. One experiencer described it like this: the beings running the processing center aren't evil in the sense we usually mean. They're doing a job, maintaining a system. They genuinely believe, or have convinced themselves, that reincarnation serves the soul's growth, but they're also farming consciousness. The two aren't contradictory in their framework. They see themselves as benevolent ranchers, providing a realm where souls can have experiences and evolve. The fact that this process generates energy they feed on is just the natural order from their perspective. But from the perspective of the souls being recycled, especially those who never wanted to come here in the first place, it's imprisonment with extra steps. The really disturbing part is the memory wipe. Every source, ancient and modern, agrees that amnesia is part of the reincarnation process. You don't remember previous lives or your existence between lives, because if you did, you'd be much harder to control. Imagine being born with full memory of who you really are, what this place is, why you're here. You'd spend your childhood desperately trying to get out, trying to maintain your awareness, fighting against the programming of parents, schools, and society that's designed to make you forget and conform. The amnesia isn't a bug, it's a feature. It makes each incarnation feel like your first and only existence, which keeps you invested in the game. Some researchers into alien abduction phenomena have noticed parallels. Abductees describe memory manipulation, screen memories covering the real experience, missing time, and beings who present themselves as benevolent while doing things the person didn't consent to. The emotional manipulation tactics are identical to what people report in certain NDEs, showing you images of loved ones to lower your defenses, telling you it's for your own good or for a higher purpose, making you feel special, chosen, part of something important. Classic manipulation technique. And when it's used by apparently divine beings in the afterlife, most people don't recognize it because we're programmed to believe anything that happens after death must be legitimate and good. But here's the key insight that changes everything. You have power you don't know about. Consciousness, in its pure form, is sovereign, can't be forced, can't be owned. The entire control system depends on consent, which is why so much effort goes into obtaining it through manipulation rather than direct coercion. If enough people knew this, if enough people died prepared to refuse the light, to question the guides, to demand their sovereignty and exit the game entirely, the whole system would destabilize. Which is precisely why this information has been suppressed for millennia, why mystery schools that taught it were destroyed, why texts containing these instructions were burned, and why, even today, mainstream spiritual teaching focuses on love and light and trust, never warning you that not everything presenting itself as divine has your best interests in mind. The question isn't whether you believe this. The question is whether you're willing to prepare for the possibility that it's true. Because if it is, and you go into death unprepared, with no knowledge of the trap, you'll take the bait, just like you probably did last time, and the time before that, for lifetimes stretching back so far you can't remember the beginning. But if you prepare, if you practice maintaining awareness, if you decide now that no matter what you encounter at death, you'll pause and question before consenting to anything, then maybe this incarnation can be your last. Maybe this is the lifetime you finally break free. In March of 2020, the Vatican made a rare announcement. For the first time in centuries, they would open a small section of their secret archives to outside researchers, not the entire collection, just documents related to Pope Pius XII and World War II. The researchers had to apply months in advance, submit to background checks, sign non-disclosure agreements about anything deemed sensitive, and were only allowed to examine pre-selected materials under constant supervision. Even with all these restrictions, what they found was explosive enough that several historians immediately published papers questioning official church narratives about Nazi collaboration and the protection of war criminals, which raises an obvious question. If that's what they're willing to let people see, what's in the sections they won't open? The Vatican's secret archives, officially renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives in 2019 to sound less ominous, contain 53 miles of shelving. That's not an exaggeration or estimate. 53 linear miles of documents, books, scrolls, and artifacts dating back over 12 centuries. The oldest items supposedly date to the 8th century, though rumors persist of materials far older stored in the deepest levels. But here's what doesn't make sense. The archives are housed in a building that couldn't possibly contain 53 miles of standard library shelving unless there are extensive underground levels. Levels that don't appear on any official architectural plans. Levels that Vatican officials refuse to confirm or deny when asked directly. In 1998, a construction crew working on routine maintenance beneath the Vatican Library broke through a wall and discovered a chamber that wasn't on any map. Before they could explore, Vatican security arrived, evacuated the workers, sealed the breach, and classified the entire incident. One of the workers later gave an interview to an Italian newspaper. He described seeing shelves carved into stone, much older than the building above, containing materials wrapped in what looked like ancient linen. He said the air that came through the opening smelled old, stale, like a tomb that hadn't been opened in centuries. The Vatican threatened legal action, the newspaper retracted the story, and the worker disappeared from public record. No follow-up investigation was ever allowed. But the Vatican's obsession with controlling information goes back much further than a few hidden chambers. In 325, at the Council of Nicaea that we mentioned earlier, Emperor Constantine and Bishop Eusebius essentially decided what Christianity would be. They reviewed hundreds of texts circulating among early Christian communities, Gospels, epistles, teachings attributed to apostles and early followers of Jesus. Most were declared heretical and ordered destroyed. The criteria for what made it into the official Bible versus what got burned wasn't divine inspiration. It was political utility. Does this text support the power structure we're building? Does it encourage obedience to church and state authority? Does it require an institutional priesthood to interpret? Or does it suggest individuals can access the divine directly? Texts that gave people too much independence, that suggested salvation didn't require the church, that taught practices allowing direct spiritual experience, these were the first to go. But you don't burn knowledge completely. You never know when you might need it. So, copies were made, taken to secure locations, locked away where the dangerous ideas couldn't spread but could be preserved, just in case. The Vatican's deepest vaults likely contain the original versions of texts we know only through heavily edited copies, complete gospels that contradict church doctrine, letters between early church fathers discussing what to hide from the public, records of councils and meetings where decisions about suppressing knowledge were debated and documented. Take the Gospel of Thomas, found at Nag Hammadi. It contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. Many are similar to what's in the canonical Gospels, but some are radically different. Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you." He's teaching that salvation comes from internal realization, not external authority. Another saying, "The kingdom of heaven is inside you and outside you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father." This is Gnostic teaching. direct knowledge, internal divine spark. No need for priests or institutional mediation. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, also suppressed, portrays Mary not as a repentant prostitute, which she never was in the original texts, but as Jesus' closest disciple, the one who understood his teaching most deeply. Peter and the other male disciples are shown questioning her authority, and Jesus defending her knowledge as superior to theirs. If this gospel had been included in the Bible, the church's entire patriarchal structure would have had no scriptural foundation. Women would have had equal or greater spiritual authority from the beginning. That couldn't be allowed. So Mary was rewritten as a sinner saved by Jesus, diminished and sexualized, her gospel locked away or burned. Then there's the Council of Constantinople in 553. This is where things get really interesting. At this council, the church officially condemned the teachings of Origen, one of the most influential early church fathers. Origen had taught reincarnation, not the Eastern version about karma and learning lessons, the Gnostic version, that souls exist before birth, that material incarnation is a fall from a higher state, and that through gnosis and spiritual practice, you can escape the cycle and return to the divine source. For 300 years, reincarnation was a standard part of Christian teaching. Then suddenly, it was heresy. The official reason given was that it contradicted the doctrine of resurrection. The real reason was that people who believe in reincarnation are harder to control with threats of hell. If you get multiple chances, if death isn't final, then the church's ultimate weapon loses its power. All records of the debate, all texts supporting Origen's position, all evidence that reincarnation was once Christian doctrine, these were collected and secured. Not destroyed, because educated clergy might need to reference them, but removed from public access. The Vatican archives contain the proof that church doctrine was invented, debated, and modified for political purposes. That what 1 billion Catholics believe today isn't ancient tradition handed down from Jesus. It's a constructed narrative designed to maximize institutional control. The archives also reportedly contain astronomical records that predate the supposed birth of civilization. In the 1500s, when the Church was still publicly insisting the Earth was the center of the universe, Vatican astronomers were using observatories and making calculations that assumed heliocentric cosmology. They knew the Earth orbited the Sun. They knew about planets we didn't officially discover until the telescope was invented. Some researchers claim Vatican records contain star charts and planetary calculations dating back thousands of years, inherited from mystery schools and earlier civilizations, showing that advanced astronomical knowledge existed long before it was supposed to. When Galileo was put on trial for heresy in 1633, for claiming the Earth moved around the Sun, the Vatican astronomers prosecuting him knew he was correct. They had the evidence in their own archives. But Galileo's crime wasn't being wrong, it was being public, sharing knowledge with common people who weren't supposed to have it. The Church could tolerate privately knowing things it publicly denied, but it couldn't tolerate that knowledge spreading where it might undermine ecclesiastical authority. Galileo spent the rest of his life under house arrest. His books were banned, and the astronomical records the Vatican had been keeping for centuries remained locked away. In the 1800s, when Darwin published On the Origin of Species, the Vatican's immediate response was condemnation. Evolution contradicted Genesis. Except the Vatican had known about evolution, or at least its possibility, for much longer than most people realize. Ancient texts in their possession describe cycles of creation, species appearing and disappearing, life forms changing over vast periods. The Sumerian tablets, which Vatican scholars absolutely had access to through their network of archaeological contacts, explicitly describe genetic manipulation and the creation of new species. The Church's problem with Darwin wasn't that he was scientifically wrong, it was that evolution made the Genesis creation story look like myth, which threatened the Bible's authority as literal truth. Here's what's probably down there in those sealed sections. Complete copies of the Library of Alexandria's collection. When that library supposedly burned, a lot of knowledge was lost. But major libraries don't keep everything in one location. They distribute copies. And the Vatican, through its extensive network even in ancient times, would have been a logical place to send duplicates of important texts. Egyptian magical texts, Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, mathematical and astronomical knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered for over 1,000 years, all sitting in climate-controlled vaults, preserved perfectly, available only to the highest levels of church hierarchy. There are probably intact versions of Gnostic texts we only have fragments of, complete mystery school, initiatory instructions, records from the Council of Nicaea showing exactly how the Bible was assembled and what was left out and why, letters between popes and temporal rulers discussing how to manage and manipulate populations, evidence of what the Church really knew during the Crusades and the Inquisition, documents showing that while they were burning people for witchcraft, Church scholars were studying the same occult knowledge in secret. In 2010, a Vatican insider who requested anonymity told a journalist that the deepest vault contains something called the Omega Archive, materials deemed too dangerous for any but the Pope and a handful of cardinals to ever see. This insider claimed the Omega Archive contains pre-flood artifacts, technology that shouldn't exist, proof of non-human intelligence interacting with humanity throughout history, and most disturbing, documents describing what the insider called the original covenant, an agreement made thousands of years ago between human rulers and non-human entities, an agreement that's still in effect, that the Church knows about, that the entire religious structure might exist to maintain. Is this true? There's no way to verify it without access, which is precisely the point. The Vatican's policy has always been to neither confirm nor deny specific items in their collection. They don't catalogue everything publicly. They don't allow comprehensive inventories by outside researchers. They control access completely, which means anything could be down there, anything at all. And the only thing we know for certain is that an institution that spent centuries burning books, killing heretics, and suppressing knowledge isn't keeping 53 miles of documents locked away because there's nothing interesting in them. The question becomes, why maintain this knowledge in secret? If the Church has proof of anything, proof that validates or contradicts their teachings, why not release it? The standard answer is that people aren't ready, that certain truths would cause social collapse, panic, the breakdown of moral order. But that's what authorities always say when they want to maintain information control. The real answer is probably simpler and darker. Knowledge is power. The Vatican's power has always come from being the gatekeeper between humanity and the divine, from being the only authorized interpreter of God's will. If people learned they could access spiritual truth directly, that ancient practices and knowledge existed outside Church control, that history wasn't what they've been taught, the entire institutional structure would become unnecessary. The vaults aren't locked to protect humanity from dangerous knowledge. They're locked to protect the institution from humanity, learning we never needed it in the first place. There's something in your blood that medical science can't explain. If you're Rh negative, you already know you're different. Hospitals treat your blood type with extra caution. If you're a woman and pregnant, doctors monitor you obsessively because your body might attack your own baby if the child is Rh positive. Your immune system treats the fetus like a foreign invader, like it's a different species, which raises a question nobody wants to answer directly. Why would that happen? Why would nature design a blood incompatibility so severe that without modern medical intervention, mothers and babies die? Unless Rh negative isn't a natural mutation, unless it came from somewhere else. The Rh factor is named after rhesus monkeys because researchers discovered it while studying monkey blood. 85% of humans have the Rh factor protein on their red blood cells. They're Rh positive, like all other primates. But 15% of humans lack it completely. They're Rh negative. And here's the part that doesn't make evolutionary sense. If humans descended from the same primate ancestors as every other ape species, we should all have the Rh factor. Every single one of us. Mutations don't work by subtraction. You don't evolve by losing a protein that's present in your entire genetic lineage. You add things, change things. But to have zero trace of a protein that every related species carries? That suggests something was removed, or something else was added. DNA, from a source that never had the Rh factor to begin with. The geographic distribution of Rh negative blood is even stranger. It's not evenly distributed across human populations. In Africa and Asia, Rh negative occurrence is extremely rare, often below 1%. But in Europe, especially Western Europe, it jumps to 15 to 20%. The Basque people of Spain have the highest concentration, over 30% Rh negative. The Basque language is unique. It's not related to any other known language on Earth, not Indo-European, not connected to any surrounding linguistic families. Linguists call it a language isolate, which is academic code for, we have no idea where this came from. The Basque people themselves have oral traditions saying they're descended from beings who came from the stars and interbred with humans. Now, mainstream genetics explains Rh negative as a random mutation that spread through European populations. But that explanation has problems. Random mutations that cause mothers to kill their babies don't spread. They get weeded out by natural selection immediately. The only way Rh-negative could have spread through European populations is if it came with significant advantages that outweighed the reproductive disadvantage, or if it wasn't a random mutation at all. If it was introduced intentionally through breeding programs thousands of years ago. Look at who obsessively tracks bloodlines. European royalty. For centuries, they've maintained detailed genealogies, married within specific families, and protected their genetic lines like they contained something precious. The official explanation is that they wanted to preserve royal blood and inheritance rights. But they took it much further than political necessity required. They tracked bloodlines across generations, monitored births, and maintained records that went back not just centuries, but allegedly thousands of years in some cases. The bloodline obsession wasn't about politics, it was about genetics, about preserving something specific in the DNA that dilutes when mixed with common bloodlines. The term blue blood for royalty isn't just metaphorical. Rh-negative blood appears slightly blue-tinted compared to Rh-positive when deoxygenated, visible through pale skin. European aristocracy was predominantly Rh-negative. They called themselves different, special, divinely ordained to rule. What if that wasn't arrogance? What if they knew something about their genetics that explained why they felt entitled to power? What if they were descendants of something that wasn't entirely human, and they've spent millennia trying to keep that genetic line from disappearing completely? The Sumerian tablets describe this explicitly. When the Anunnaki created humans, most were designed as workers, genetically limited, short-lived, but the tablets also describe a separate program, the creation of special humans who received more Anunnaki DNA. These were installed as intermediaries, kings, priests, leaders who could communicate with and serve the Anunnaki while managing the common human population. The tablets call this kingship descending from heaven, and kingship came with specific genetic markers that were carefully maintained through controlled breeding. Fast forward thousands of years, and we still have royal families claiming descent from gods. The pharaohs said they were children of Ra. The Japanese imperial family claims descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu. European monarchs claimed divine right to rule granted by God. But what if these weren't metaphors? What if these families maintained genetic information, passed down through secret teachings, that they really did have non-human ancestry? And what if Rh-negative blood was the marker, the genetic signature that identified who carried more of the original Anunnaki or non-human DNA? People with Rh-negative blood report unusual characteristics at higher rates than the general population. Lower body temperature, higher than average IQ, extra vertebrae, higher sensory perception, increased intuition and psychic experiences, unusual eye colors, especially hazel and green, a feeling of not belonging, of being fundamentally different. Now, this could all be confirmation bias and New Age fantasy. Except, there's data. Studies have found that Rh-negative individuals do have measurably different physical and neurological characteristics. Lower pulse rates, higher resistance to certain diseases, different electrical conductivity in their blood. These aren't subjective feelings. These are measurable differences that medical science acknowledges but doesn't explain. There's also the abduction connection. Researchers investigating alien abduction phenomena consistently find that Rh-negative individuals report abduction experiences at rates significantly higher than their percentage of the population. Some studies suggest Rh-negative people are abducted at rates 3 to 4 times higher than Rh-positive people. The abduction experiences often involve genetic procedures, extraction of ova and sperm, pregnancy and fetal removal. Hybrid children shown to abductees. The implication is that whoever's conducting these abductions has a specific interest in Rh-negative genetics. They're monitoring these bloodlines, maybe maintaining them, maybe using them for ongoing hybrid programs. Dr. David Jacobs, who studied thousands of abduction cases, found patterns suggesting a multi-generational breeding program. Abductees often discover their parents were abducted, their children are abducted. It runs in families, and when you map those families, Rh-negative blood appears at much higher frequencies than random chance would predict. Jacobs concluded, reluctantly because it sounds insane, that someone is running a long-term genetic project using specific human bloodlines, preserving something, creating something, and they've been doing it for generations, possibly centuries. This is where conspiracy meets documented fact. Intelligence agencies have maintained blood type databases for decades. During the Cold War, both the U.S. and Soviet Union collected blood samples from populations worldwide and catalogued them. The official reason was medical preparedness for biological warfare, but they focused disproportionately on tracking Rh-negative individuals. During the Human Genome Project, extra attention was paid to chromosomal differences in Rh-negative subjects. Why? What strategic or medical value does tracking 15% of the population by blood type provide, unless that blood type indicates something more significant than a missing protein? There are researchers who claim, and I can't verify this, that certain military and intelligence positions preferentially recruit Rh-negative individuals, that these people score higher on remote viewing tests, that they're more resistant to certain types of electromagnetic manipulation and mind control techniques, that their pineal glands function differently, are less prone to calcification, and retain greater sensitivity to non-physical phenomena. If any of that is true, and there's circumstantial evidence suggesting it might be, then Rh-negative blood isn't just a genetic curiosity, it's a marker of capability, of humans who retain more of whatever abilities we were supposed to have before they were bred out or suppressed in the general population. The implications are uncomfortable. If Rh-negative blood indicates hybrid ancestry, then some humans are more genetically human than others. If it marks a bloodline that's been monitored and maintained by non-human intelligence, then those individuals might have purposes or destinies they're unaware of. If it correlates with enhanced abilities, then we're not all equal blank slates. Some of us came into this world with hardware differences that affect what we can perceive and do. This contradicts the comfortable modern belief that we're all the same, but the data suggests we're not. We're variants. And someone has been very interested in tracking which variant is which. Here's what makes this especially relevant to everything else we've discussed. If the pineal gland is humanity's sealed antenna, and if certain bloodlines have pineal glands that are more functional or less susceptible to calcification, then those bloodlines would be priority targets for the control system. You'd want to track them, monitor them, maybe abduct them periodically to ensure the genetics don't get lost, because if those individuals start waking up, if they start activating their abilities, they'd be much harder to keep in the prison. They'd be able to see through the illusion more easily. They'd be the ones most likely to remember who they really are and find the exit. Which means if you're Rh-negative, you're not just statistically unusual. You might be genetically significant, tagged, monitored, part of something larger that you haven't been told about. And the fact that you feel different, that you've always felt like you don't quite belong here, that might not be neurosis or ego. It might be genetic memory. An echo of something in your DNA that knows it came from somewhere else and isn't supposed to be trapped here. The question is what you do with that information. Do you dismiss it as fantasy? Or do you start investigating your own bloodline, your own abilities, and asking why someone might have been monitoring your family for generations? In 1939, a conference was held in London by the British Standards Institute. The topic was musical tuning. For centuries, musicians had tuned their instruments to different frequencies, with a 428 Hz and a 432 Hz being common standards. But at this conference, under pressure from Nazi Germany's Joseph Goebbels and supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, a new standard was proposed, a 440 Hz. The official justification was international standardization for orchestras and radio broadcasts. Within a few years, despite opposition from musicians who said the new tuning sounded harsher and less natural, a 440 became the global standard. Every instrument manufactured, every recording made, every piece of music you hear today is tuned to 440 Hz. Here's what they didn't tell people. 432 Hz, the older standard that was abandoned, is mathematically aligned with the natural resonance patterns found throughout nature. Water crystallizes into symmetrical, beautiful patterns when exposed to 432 Hz frequencies. Plants grow faster. Human cells respond with increased coherence. Ancient instruments, including Tibetan singing bowls and Egyptian temple bells, were tuned to 432 Hz, or harmonic multiples of it. This frequency appears to synchronize with human biorhythms, with the Schumann resonance of Earth's electromagnetic field, with the orbital frequencies of the planets. It's a frequency that creates coherence, harmony, expanded awareness. 440 Hz, by contrast, creates subtle dissonance, nothing extreme, nothing you'd consciously notice, but measurable. Brainwave studies show that music tuned to 440 Hz stimulates the left brain hemisphere preferentially, increasing analytical thinking and beta wave activity. It keeps you alert, focused, slightly agitated, perfect for productivity and consumption. Music tuned to 432 Hz activates more of the right hemisphere, increases alpha waves, promotes meditative states, and enhances feelings of connection and expanded consciousness. Not perfect for productivity. Not good for keeping people in the mental state where they're obedient workers and eager consumers. Was this change deliberately calculated to suppress consciousness, or just an unfortunate coincidence? Well, it was pushed hard by the Rockefeller Foundation, the same organization that revolutionized American education with a specific agenda. In 1903, John D. Rockefeller founded the General Education Board. Their mission statement, preserved in public records, is stunningly explicit. In our dream we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our moulding hand. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. Read that again. They explicitly stated their goal was not to educate, but to condition, to create a docile workforce, and they succeeded. The American education system, which most of the world copied, doesn't teach critical thinking. It teaches obedience. Sit down, be quiet, memorize what you're told, take standardized tests that measure your ability to recall information and follow instructions. The subjects aren't chosen to expand consciousness or teach wisdom. They're chosen to create competent employees who don't question the system they're serving. History is taught as disconnected facts, never the patterns that would let you understand how power actually operates. Science is taught as settled truth, never the process of questioning and discovery. Philosophy, comparative religion, consciousness studies, anything that might make you think deeply about reality and your place in it, these are electives at best, usually omitted entirely. Meanwhile, the chemical suppression that started with fluoride in the water has expanded dramatically. Glyphosate, marketed as Roundup, is now the most widely used herbicide in history. It's sprayed on virtually all conventionally grown crops in developed countries. You're eating it with every meal, unless you buy organic. Glyphosate disrupts the gut microbiome, which we now know directly affects brain function through the gut-brain axis. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. It interferes with the production of serotonin and other neurotransmitters. And research increasingly suggests it contributes to pineal gland calcification just like fluoride, working synergistically with other environmental toxins to shut down the exact organ needed for expanded consciousness. Then there's aluminum. It's in deodorants, cookware, food additives, vaccine adjuvants, and increasingly, it's being found in atmospheric samples at levels that shouldn't be there naturally. Whether you believe in chemtrails or think they're condensation trails, the fact is that aluminum concentrations in rainwater and soil have increased dramatically over the past few decades. Aluminum accumulates in brain tissue. It's strongly associated with neurodegenerative diseases, and like fluoride and glyphosate, it concentrates in the pineal gland. 3 different common substances, all showing up in everyone's bodies, all targeting the same tiny organ that every ancient tradition said was the key to spiritual awakening. The electromagnetic assault is newer but potentially more damaging. In 1990, the average person had minimal electromagnetic field exposure beyond natural sources. Today, we're bathed in it constantly. Cell phones emit microwave radiation directly against our skulls. Wi-Fi routers broadcast continuously in our homes. Cell towers cover every populated area. Smart meters on houses. Bluetooth devices. 5G networks rolling out with millimeter wave frequencies that have never been tested for long-term biological effects. The official position is that non-ionizing radiation is harmless, but study after study, often buried or defunded when results are uncomfortable, shows biological effects, changes in cellular communication, disruption of circadian rhythms, interference with the body's natural electromagnetic fields. The pineal gland is electromagnetically sensitive. It responds to Earth's magnetic field, which is how it regulates circadian rhythms and seasonal cycles. When you flood the environment with artificial electromagnetic frequencies thousands of times stronger than natural background levels, you're jamming the signal. The pineal can't distinguish natural frequencies from artificial noise. It's like trying to hear a whisper in a room full of screaming. Whatever information the pineal is supposed to receive from natural sources, Whatever connection it maintains to non-physical realms gets drowned out by the electromagnetic soup we've created. And then there's the attention economy. Human consciousness has limited bandwidth. What you focus on literally shapes your brain through neuroplasticity. For most of human history, people had long periods of boredom, silence, time when the mind would wander and enter spontaneous, meditative states. These are the states where insights come, where creativity emerges, where consciousness expands beyond its normal boundaries. Now, every spare moment is filled. Phone in your pocket, notifications constantly, social media engineered specifically to capture and hold attention, autoplay video, infinite scroll, algorithms optimized to keep you engaged, which means keeping you in reactive emotional states, because calm, centered awareness doesn't click ads. The average person now checks their phone over 80 times a day, spends 6 to 7 hours on screens, goes into mild withdrawal if separated from their device for even an hour. This isn't accidental. Documents from tech companies show they deliberately employ psychologists and behavioral scientists to make their products as addictive as possible. The attention economy doesn't just want your time, it wants to fragment your consciousness, keep you in a perpetual state of shallow awareness, skimming the surface, never going deep enough to encounter anything real. Sleep disruption is another vector. Blue light from screens suppresses melatonin production. The pineal gland normally ramps up melatonin at night, which does more than make you sleepy. Melatonin is also the precursor for DMT synthesis. Deep sleep is when the pineal is most active, when consciousness naturally expands into dream states that ancient cultures considered at least as real as waking reality. But if you're staring at a bright screen until you collapse in bed, if you're chronically sleep deprived like most people in developed nations, your pineal never gets to do its job properly. You're stuck in beta wave consciousness, alert, awake, but not aware, not conscious in the deeper sense. Diet is weaponized too. Processed food isn't just unhealthy, it's specifically formulated to be addictive and to make you sick in ways that require ongoing pharmaceutical intervention. High fructose corn syrup, artificial sweeteners, preservatives, emulsifiers, all of these disrupt gut bacteria and hormonal signaling. They create inflammation, brain fog, lethargy. You feel bad enough that you need stimulants to function. Coffee, energy drinks, prescription stimulants for an invented epidemic of attention deficit disorder. These keep you functional enough to work but not clear enough to see the cage. Meanwhile, actual nutrition that supports brain function and pineal health is increasingly scarce. Iodine, critical for pineal function, has been removed from bread and replaced with bromine, which competes with iodine receptors and makes you deficient. Magnesium, zinc, vitamins D and K2, all the cofactors needed for proper neurological function and to prevent calcification, these are depleted from soil by industrial agriculture. You'd have to eat 5 times as much produce as your grandparents to get the same mineral content. But you're not told this. You're told to trust the food pyramid, which was designed by agricultural lobbyists to sell grain, not to optimize human health. The pharmaceutical approach to consciousness is equally problematic. Feeling anxious? Here's a pill that dampens your emotional range. Feeling depressed? Here's another pill that flattens your affect and makes it hard to access deep feelings. Can't focus? Amphetamines. Can't sleep? Sedatives. Every natural response to an insane world is pathologized and medicated. The goal isn't to address why people are anxious, depressed, and unable to focus in a society structured to create those states. The goal is to make you functional enough to keep participating without actually solving anything. And if you do start waking up, if you start questioning, the social conditioning kicks in. You're labeled conspiracy theorist, crazy, paranoid. Your social circle distances itself. Online platforms algorithmically suppress content that deviates too far from approved narratives. You're not censored directly. That would be obvious. You're just shadow banned, demonetized, fact-checked by organizations funded by the very entities you're questioning. Your reach is quietly limited. And if you're effective enough, persistent enough, you end up on lists, monitored, sometimes worse. The totality of modern suppression is breathtaking in its coordination. Every system works together. Education programs you. Media fragments your attention. Food and water poison you slowly. Electromagnetic fields jam your biological antenna. Pharma medicates away your natural responses. Social conditioning makes you afraid to question. Economic pressure keeps you too busy and stressed to do inner work. And underlying all of it is a message repeated constantly. You're just a body, just a brain. Consciousness is an accident of matter. There's nothing beyond physical reality. Anyone who says otherwise is deluded or trying to scam you. But here's the crack in the system. They have to work this hard to keep you asleep. If humans naturally stayed unconscious, if we were actually just biological machines with no connection to anything larger, none of this would be necessary. The fact that they're fluoridating water, modifying food, controlling information, filling the environment with electromagnetic noise, all of it proves they're afraid of what happens when you wake up, which means waking up is possible. The suppression can be overcome. You just have to recognize it first. See the cage before you can escape it, and now you see it. The question is what you're going to do about it. Before we get into practical steps, important note, I'm not a doctor. This information is for educational purposes. Consult healthcare professionals before making major changes, especially if you have medical conditions. So here we are. We've examined the evidence from ancient tablets to modern suppression techniques. We've traced the pattern from creation to control to the systematic shutdown of human consciousness. We've identified the pineal gland as the biological key and mapped how every aspect of modern life targets it specifically. The question that matters now isn't whether this is all true. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Because understanding the prison doesn't free you from it. Knowledge without action is just entertainment. And if you've stayed with me this far, you're not here to be entertained. You're here because something inside you recognizes this information as important, as real, as the answer you've been searching for without knowing the question. The good news is that the suppression isn't total. The calcification can be reversed. The antenna can be reactivated. The ancient protocols still work if you actually practice them instead of just reading about them. What I'm about to share isn't theory. These are practical steps synthesized from Gnostic texts, Egyptian mystery teachings, Eastern practices, and modern research into consciousness and neurology. Some will sound simple, almost too simple. That's intentional. The most powerful techniques are often the most basic. Complexity is a form of gatekeeping. Making things complicated ensures only dedicated initiates figure it out. But we're past that point. The information needs to spread quickly. So, I'm giving you the essentials, the core protocol that any human can implement starting today. Step 1 is decalcification. Your pineal gland is probably calcified if you're over 30 and you've been drinking tap water and eating processed food. The first thing you need to do is stop making it worse. Filter your water. Not with a basic filter. Those don't remove fluoride. You need reverse osmosis or a specific fluoride removal system. Yes, it's more expensive, but you're trying to reactivate the most important organ in your body. This isn't optional. Every glass of fluoridated water continues the damage. Stop drinking it today. Switch to organic food as much as possible. Glyphosate residues are in everything conventional. If you can't afford all organic, prioritize what you consume most. If you eat bread, make it organic. If you drink coffee, make it organic. These are daily inputs that accumulate. For calcification that's already there, specific supplements help break it down. Raw apple cider vinegar, the kind with the mother, helps dissolve calcium deposits. Take a tablespoon in water every morning. Vitamin K2, specifically the MK7 form, directs calcium away from soft tissues like your pineal gland and into bones where it belongs. Iodine supplementation helps because fluoride and bromine compete with iodine for the same receptors. Taking iodine displaces the toxins. Start low, a few milligrams, and work up slowly because detox reactions can be intense. Tamarind is used in Ayurvedic medicine specifically for pineal decalcification. You can get tamarind paste or supplements. Chlorella and spirulina, both blue-green algae, are powerful detoxifiers that cross the blood-brain barrier and chelate heavy metals, including aluminum. MSM, methylsulfonylmethane, also helps break down calcification. And possibly most important, raw cacao. Real cacao, not processed chocolate, is one of the most potent pineal activators. Ancient Mesoamerican cultures used it ceremonially for this exact purpose. It increases blood flow, delivers antioxidants, and stimulates pineal function. This isn't a quick process. Decalcification takes months, sometimes years depending on how calcified you are. But you'll notice changes. Dreams become more vivid. Intuition increases. That feeling of being disconnected from something starts to ease. You're rebuilding the hardware. But hardware alone isn't enough. You need to activate the software. Step 2 is frequency work. We talked about how 440 Hz music keeps you in a suppressed state. Start listening to music tuned to 432 Hz. There are entire libraries of it online now. Play it while you work, sleep, meditate. Let your cells remember what resonance feels like. Beyond that, specific frequencies target specific states. 528 Hz is called the frequency of transformation. It's associated with DNA repair and miracles according to ancient solfeggio scales. 963 Hz is the frequency of divine connection, activating the pineal specifically. You can find pure tone generators online or recordings designed for meditation. Binaural beats are another tool. These work by playing slightly different frequencies in each ear. Your brain creates a third phantom frequency equal to the difference, and this entrains your brainwaves. Theta frequencies, 4 to 7 Hz, are where deep meditation and visionary states occur. Delta frequencies, 0.5 to 4 Hz, are deep sleep and where the pineal produces DMT. Using binaural beats, you can guide your brain into these states consciously. 30 minutes a day of theta frequency binaural beats while meditating can accelerate pineal activation dramatically. Step 3 is darkness practice. The pineal gland is activated by absence of light. In complete darkness for extended periods, melatonin floods your system, and if your pineal is functional, DMT production increases. Ancient initiations often involved days in underground chambers with zero light. You can do a modified version. Get your bedroom completely dark. No LED lights from electronics. Blackout curtains. The darker the better. Or go further. Some people do darkness retreats, spending 3 to 7 days in completely dark rooms. This forces the pineal into overdrive and can trigger profound visionary experiences. It's intense. Not for beginners. But even just making your sleep environment truly dark will make a difference. Step 4 is breath work. Breath controls consciousness more directly than almost anything else. The ancient yogis knew this. That's why pranayama, breath control, was considered essential practice. Specific breathing patterns alter blood chemistry, oxygen levels, and electromagnetic activity in the brain. The Wim Hof method, which is essentially Tummo meditation from Tibetan Buddhism adapted for Westerners, involves rapid, deep breathing followed by breath retention. This creates a temporary state of controlled hypoxia and floods the body with energy. People report out-of-body experiences, encounters with non-physical entities, and spontaneous healing from doing this practice regularly. Holotropic breathwork, developed by Stanislav Grof after LSD research became illegal, uses continuous connected breathing to induce non-ordinary states. Sessions last hours. People relive birth trauma, access past life memories, encounter the same entities reported in DMT experiences, all from breathing. No substances needed. If your pineal is active, breathwork can take you as far as any psychedelic, and you're in control the entire time. You can stop whenever you want. It's the safest, most accessible way to explore expanded consciousness. Step 5 is meditation, but not the watered-down Western version. Not mindfulness to reduce stress so you can be a better worker. Real meditation. The kind designed to shift your identity from the body-mind to pure awareness. The ancient techniques are simple but profound. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, focus attention on the space between your eyebrows, where the pineal gland sits. Don't try to see anything or make anything happen. Just rest your attention there gently. Thoughts will arise. Let them pass. Emotions will arise. Let them pass. Sensations will arise. Let them pass. You're not trying to achieve anything. You're practicing being consciousness that observes rather than consciousness that identifies with what it observes. Do this daily. Start with 20 minutes. Work up to an hour or more. At some point, if you're consistent, something shifts. You'll have an experience, brief at first, where you recognize you're not the thoughts, not the body, not the person you believed yourself to be. You're the awareness in which all of that appears. This recognition is what the Gnostics called gnosis, direct knowing. It changes everything, because once you've experienced yourself as consciousness independent of the body, death becomes less frightening. Control becomes harder. You've verified for yourself that you're more than this meat suit trapped in a material prison. Step 6, and this is controversial, is plant medicines where legal. Psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, San Pedro cactus. These aren't recreational drugs. They're sacraments. Tools that ancient cultures used specifically for pineal activation and consciousness expansion. Modern research is finally catching up. showing that psychedelics produce experiences indistinguishable from genuine mystical experiences. They dissolve the ego temporarily, show you realms beyond physical matter, connect you with intelligence that isn't human, and they do it reliably, repeatedly, for almost everyone who takes them in appropriate doses. But, and this is critical, set and setting matter enormously. These substances aren't magic pills, they're amplifiers. They magnify whatever's in your consciousness. If you approach them casually, without preparation, without intention, you can have terrifying experiences that do more harm than good. If you approach them ceremonially, with proper guidance, with the intention of breaking through the illusion and seeing truth, they can show you in one night what might take years of meditation to access. They're shortcuts, powerful, dangerous if misused, but available, and legal in increasing number of jurisdictions, or accessible through religious exemptions and ceremonial contexts. Step 7 is fasting. Every major spiritual tradition includes fasting practices, not because suffering brings enlightenment, but because when the digestive system shuts down, energy and blood flow redirect, including to the brain. Extended fasting, 3 days or more, triggers autophagy, where your body starts consuming damaged cells and clearing out accumulated toxins. The pineal gland, if it's calcified, starts getting cleaned out. Ancient mystery schools required 40-day fasts before major initiations. You don't need to start there. But even intermittent fasting, restricting eating to a 6 to 8 hour window daily, helps. It gives your body time to clean and repair. Water fasting for 3 to 7 days, done properly with medical supervision if you have health conditions, can trigger visionary states. Many people report that by day 3 or 4, consciousness shifts, the hunger stops, clarity increases, dreams intensify. You start accessing information and experiences that don't feel like they're coming from your normal mind. This is the pineal activating as your body moves into survival mode and starts utilizing capacities usually kept dormant. Step 8 is death meditation. If the reincarnation trap is real, if you're going to be confronted at death with manipulation designed to get you to consent to another incarnation, you need to prepare now. Don't wait until you're dead and confused. Practice. Visualize the death process. Imagine leaving your body, encountering light, being shown images of loved ones, being told you have karma to resolve or lessons to learn, and practice your response. Firmly, calmly, declare your sovereignty. I am consciousness. I am not obligated to incarnate. I do not consent to contracts made under manipulation or incomplete information. I reclaim my freedom. This might sound silly when you're alive and healthy, but if you practice this meditation regularly, it becomes automatic, ingrained. So when you actually die, when you're disoriented and vulnerable, you won't fall for the manipulation. You'll remember your sovereignty. You'll remember you have a choice. The ancient Egyptians didn't prepare elaborate books of the dead for entertainment. They were training manuals, instructions for maintaining consciousness and making conscious choices at the moment of death. You need the same preparation. Step 9 is community. You can't do this alone. Not because it's impossible, but because isolation makes you vulnerable. The system wants you alone, consuming your individualized content feed, thinking your awakening is just your personal journey. Find others, online if necessary. In person is better. People who are asking the same questions, practicing the same techniques. You'll support each other, verify each other's experiences, and create a field, an energetic resonance that makes the work easier. Mystery schools weren't individual practices, they were communities, group rituals and initiations, because collective consciousness has power that individual consciousness doesn't. If you're trying to break out of prison, you want accomplices. And step 10, the one nobody wants to hear, is that you have to actually change your life. You can't awaken while maintaining the lifestyle that keeps you asleep. If your job requires you to compromise your integrity, quit. If your relationship requires you to suppress your authentic self, end it. If your habits keep you numb and distracted, break them. This doesn't mean becoming homeless or abandoning responsibility. It means aligning your external life with your internal awakening. The cognitive dissonance of knowing truth while living lies will tear you apart. You might lose friends, probably will. People who aren't ready for this information will think you've gone crazy. Let them go. You might lose opportunities, jobs that require you to participate in systems you now recognize as control mechanisms. Walk away. The universe rewards courage. When you commit fully to awakening, To living as consciousness rather than as a programmed biological robot, reality responds, synchronicities increase, resources appear. You'll be guided, not by external authorities telling you what to do, but by your own deepening connection to the intelligence that's been waiting for you to remember it exists. Here's what I can promise you. If you implement these practices, if you commit to the protocol for 6 months to a year, your life will change. Not might change, will change. Your dreams will intensify. Your intuition will sharpen. You'll start having experiences that don't fit the materialist worldview, and gradually, the fear that's been controlling you your entire life will loosen. The fear of death, the fear of not being enough, the fear of what other people think. These fears are tools of control. And when you recognize yourself as consciousness temporarily wearing a body, rather than as a body somehow producing consciousness, the fears lose their grip. This is the escape plan hidden in plain sight. The Gnostic texts described it, the mystery schools taught it, the suppression system tries to prevent it. But it's always been available. Every tool you need is either free or accessible. The only question is whether you'll actually do it, whether you'll commit, or whether you'll read this, think it's interesting, and go back to your normal life. Because most people will do exactly that. They'll nod along, agree it makes sense, and change nothing. They'll find reasons why now isn't the right time, why they need to wait until circumstances are better, and they'll die having never attempted the escape. But you're still here. You've listened for 2 hours. Something in you recognizes this matters. So maybe you're different. Maybe you're one of the ones who actually does the work, who takes the information and implements it, who breaks free. I can't do it for you. Nobody can. The nature of the prison is that you have to choose to leave. Nobody can drag you out. But the door is there. The door has always been there. And now you know where it is and how to open it. What you do next is entirely up to you. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If this resonated, share it with others who might be ready. Leave a comment about your own experiences with these practices. And remember, the biggest prison is the one you don't know you're in. Now you know. Act accordingly.